Night descended like a velvet shroud over the sprawling Thompson estate, the air thick with the unspoken promise of a storm gathering its fury on the horizon. Richard Rick Thompson, a 45-year-old billionaire whose name was a byword for ruthless efficiency, in the boardroom, stared out his study window at the bruised, churning clouds. His wife, Jennifer Jen Thompson, 40, slipped into the room, her presence as quiet as the heartache in her eyes, a testament to another failed round of IVF. "Do you think we'll ever get our miracle, Robert?" Jen asked, her voice a fragile thread against the backdrop of their shared pain, using his formal name as she often did in moments of deep sorrow. Rick turned from the window, his gaze meeting hers, a rare vulnerability softening his features. "I don't know, my dear, but I promise I won't give up." They couldn't know that fate was about to stage its most audacious intervention. A sudden, violent crack of thunder rattled the estate's foundations, causing the lights to stutter. In that same instant, the security system blared an alert. Rick's brow furrowed, his fingers flying across the tablet on his desk. "There's something at the front door," he murmured, a note of intrigue in his voice. Jen leaned in, her curiosity piqued. What could it be at this hour with this weather, both headed to the main door, a shared anxiety mounting with every step? Rick, ever the pragmatist, snatched a golf club from a nearby bag before swinging the heavy oak door open. What they saw rendered them utterly paralyzed. There, precariously sheltered from the rain by the small porch, was a large wicker basket, and inside it, wrapped in tattered blankets, 6 newborn babies slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm raging around them. "Oh my God," Jen gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in shock. Rick, a man rarely rattled, felt a weakness in his knees. This is impossible," he muttered, his mind refusing to process the scene before him. Jen was the first to recover from the initial shock, a primal instinct taking over. With trembling hands, she leaned in to pick up one of the children. The baby, sensing movement, opened its eyes, an intense, sky-blue gaze that seemed to hold all the mysteries of the universe. Robert Linda called, her voice choked with emotion. "They're cold. We need to bring them inside now," her use of both their names, a plea of shared urgency. As if waking from a trance, Rick picked up the basket and carried it inside the mansion. The couple moved with a silent, urgent grace, taking the babies into the living room where a crackling fireplace burned. While Jen checked each child with a mother's care, Rick searched the basket for any clue about the children's origins. There was nothing but a small, crumpled note that read, "Please take care of them, they deserve a chance." "No names, no explanations," Rick said, frustration evident in his voice. Who would do this, and why? Jen, busy wrapping the babies in warm cashmere blankets, looked up at her husband with tearful eyes. Maybe this is our miracle, Robert." Jen's words triggered a flood of memories in Rick. Flashbacks of years of battling INF fertility filled his mind. The doctor's office was cold and impersonal, much like the physician's words. "I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, but your chances of conceiving naturally are practically zero." Jen had cried silently, while Rick, determined as ever, asked about alternatives. IVF, surrogacy, adoption. They tried everything. Month turned into years. Each negative test, each failed adoption was like a dagger to the couple's heart. Rick, the man who could buy almost anything in the world, felt powerless in the face of his wife's deepest desire. The last adoption attempt had been particularly painful. After months of preparation, visits, and hope, the biological mother changed her mind at the last minute. Jen was devastated, and Rick vowed that he would never let his wife endure that pain again. The flashback receded as Rick blinked, returning to the present. He looked at Jen, who was cradling 2 of the babies, her eyes shining with a love he had never seen before. "Linda," he began hesitantly, "we can't just keep them. We need to call the authorities, find their parents." Jen looked at him, a fierce determination in her eyes. "Robert, don't you see 6 babies abandoned right at our door after everything we've been through?" Rick felt his heart race. Part of him wanted to be rational, to follow legal procedures, but another part, a part he had long buried under layers of logic and pragmatism, began to stir. What if, he hesitated, the words feeling strange in his mouth. What if we take care of them just for a while we investigate where they came from? Jen's face lit up with hope. "Would you do that?" Rick looked at the 6 tiny faces, each one unique and perfect in its own way. He felt something shift inside him, as though a long-closed door was finally opening. "Yes," he said firmly, "we'll take care of them, and we'll find out where they came from." In that moment, while the storm raged outside, a new family was born inside the Thompson estate. Rick and Jen didn't know what the future held, which challenges they would face, or which secrets they would uncover. But that night, with 6 unexpected miracles in their arms, they felt for the first time in years, complete. As the night wore on, Rick made discreet phone calls, ensuring they would have everything needed to care for the babies in the coming days. Jen, meanwhile, couldn't take her eyes off the children, memorizing every detail of their tiny faces. "What shall we call them?" she asked softly, as she fed one of the girls with a makeshift bottle. Rick paused, looking at the 6 little beings who, in a matter of hours, had turned his world upside down. "How about Emma, Olivia, Ava, Sophia, Isabella, and Mia?" he suggested, surprised at how easily the names came to his mind. Jen smiled, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. "It's perfect," she whispered. As day began to break, bringing with it the promise of a new beginning, Rick and Jen Thompson found themselves on the threshold of a journey that would change their lives forever. The mystery of the 6 abandoned babies was just beginning, and with it a story of love, secrets, and redemption that neither of them could have predicted. The first rays of sunlight had barely started to illuminate the Thompson estate when Rick was already in his study, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes marked by deep circles after a sleepless night, darting anxiously over the notes scattered on his desk. "I understand, Detective Johnson," he said, his voice tense, "but I need this investigation to be carried out with the utmost discretion. No media, no leaks. We're dealing with children here." On the other end of the line, Rick's trusted private detective assured him of confidentiality. "Don't worry, Mr. Thornton. We'll handle this as quietly as possible. We'll start immediately looking for any information about recent multiple births or missing babies." Rick hung up and sighed heavily, running his hands over his tired face. The reality of the situation he and Jen found themselves in was beginning to weigh on his shoulders. 6 newborn babies, abandoned at his door. It was as if the universe were playing an elaborate joke on them, handing them exactly what they wanted most, but wrapped in a mystery that could shatter their hearts at any moment. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Jen entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Her eyes, though tired, shone with a light he hadn't seen in years. "How are they?" Rick asked, gratefully accepting the coffee. Jen smiled, sitting in the chair opposite his desk. "Sleeping like angels. The nurse we hired is taking care of them now, Robert." I've never felt like this before. It's as if they're ours," Rick completed gently, seeing the emotion in his wife's eyes. Jen nodded, biting her lip to keep the tears from falling. "I know we can't get attached. I know we'll probably have to let them go, but I can't help it, Robert. They're already in my heart." Rick reached across the desk, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I know, sweetheart, believe me, I understand. But we have to be cautious. We don't know anything about these children's origins or their biological parents. What if it's something illegal?" The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with implications. Jen pulled back slightly, worry shadowing her face. "You really think it could be something like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rick shook his head, uncertain. "I don't know. That's why I hired the best detective I know we need to find the truth, Linda, for the girl's safety and ours." The days that followed were a surreal mix of joy and anxiety for the Thompson couple as they adjusted to the frantic routine of caring for 6 newborns. Rick coordinated a silent, meticulous investigation. Detective Miller and his team combed through hospitals, clinics, and birth records in search of any clue about the sextuplets. Security camera footage from the streets near the estate was analyzed frame by frame. Discreet ads were placed in local newspapers seeking information on lost or abandoned babies. Meanwhile, inside the estate, Jen blossomed in her new role. She spent hours with the girls, learning each detail of their emerging personalities. Abigail Abby, the oldest by a few minutes, was already showing signs of being the natural leader of the group. Harper was the calmest, always observing everything with curious eyes. Scarlett had a strong temper, making her presence known whenever she wanted attention. Madison, Maddie, was the dreamer, often lost in her own little world. Chloe was the giggler, her smile lighting up the room. And Emily, Emmy the youngest, was the most attached, always seeking Jen's arms and affection. Rick, in turn, found himself surprised at how attached he was becoming to the girls. Known for his coldness in business, he now spent his time making funny faces and silly noises to elicit laughter from the babies. At night, when everyone was asleep, he often slipped into the improvised nursery just to watch them sleep, marveling at how perfect they were. As the weeks turned into months, Rick's anxiety grew. Each day without news was another day he and Jen became more deeply attached to the girls, and each day also brought with it the fear that someone would appear to take them away. It was on a rainy afternoon, 3 months after the girls' arrival, that Detective Miller requested an urgent meeting with Rick. "Mr. Thornton," the detective began, his face serious. "After an exhaustive investigation, we found absolutely nothing. No birth records of sextuplets, no reports of missing babies matching their descriptions. It's as if these children simply materialized out of nowhere." Rick felt a mixture of relief and concern. "What about the biological parents? Any leads?" Miller shook his head. "Nothing concrete. We analyzed the girls' DNA, and they're definitely sisters, identical sextuplets, in fact. But there's no match in any database we have access to." Rick was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "So what does this mean for us legally speaking?" The detective hesitated before replying. "Well, Mr. Thornton, technically the children are considered abandoned, with no biological parents coming forward, and with you taking care of them for this length of time, you have a strong case for adoption if you choose to go that route." The words hit Rick like a bolt of lightning. Adoption. The possibility he and Jen both feared and secretly longed for now presented itself as a tangible reality. "Thank you, John," Rick said, his mind already racing with implications. "I need to discuss this with Linda." That night, after the girls had been put to bed, Rick and Jen sat on the estate's porch, the stars shining above as silent witnesses to their conversation. "Linda," Rick began softly. The detective found nothing, no clue about the girls' biological parents, no official record of their birth. Jen held her breath, her eyes widening at the news. "And what does that mean for us?" Rick took his wife's hands in his heart pounding with what he was about to propose. "It means that if we want, we can adopt them. Officially, legally, they would be our daughters." Linda, the tears Jen had held back for months, finally overflowed. "Oh, Robert," she sobbed, "it's all I've ever wanted in the world. But what if someone shows up later? What if we have to give them back?" Rick pulled her into a tight hug, feeling his own emotions rise to the surface. "I can't promise that will never happen," he said gently, "but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to protect our family, because that's what we are now, Linda, a family." The decision to start the adoption process was unanimous, but the road ahead was far from easy. The bureaucratic system wasn't prepared for a case as unusual as the Thompsons. The first difficulties arose when they tried to register the girls without original birth certificates. Each step became a challenge. Rick assembled a team of lawyers to navigate the legal maze, determined to ensure everything was done properly. Social workers visited frequently and thoroughly. The Thompson estate, once a symbol of luxury and privacy, was now under constant scrutiny. Every room was inspected, every aspect of the couple's life questioned. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, one particularly stern social worker, asked during a visit, "Do you understand the magnitude of what you're planning to do? Raising 6 children isn't like running a company. There's no margin for error." Jen, who had developed an inner strength that surprised even Rick, responded with conviction. "We understand perfectly these girls are a miracle to us, and we're committed to giving them all the love, care, and opportunities they deserve." Rick added, "We have the resources to make sure they have everything they need, including professional help, but more importantly, we have a love we've waited years to give." Despite the couple's determination, doubts persisted. Some wondered if they were truly prepared for the Herculean task of raising sextuplets. Others raised ethical questions about billionaires buying babies. During this turbulent time, Rick and Jen discovered a resilience they never knew they had. They came together as never before, facing each obstacle as a team, always with the girls' well-being as their top priority. The estate was adapted to meet the children's needs. An entire floor was transformed into a true children's paradise, complete with themed bedrooms, play areas, and even a small library stocked with children's books. Jen immersed herself in courses and workshops on raising multiples, determined to become the best mother possible for her 6 daughters. Rick, for his part, began restructuring his business, delegating responsibilities so he could be more present in family life. Finally, after months of legal battles, visits, evaluations, and mountains of paperwork, the big day arrived. Rick and Jen stood before the judge, the 6 girls, now almost a year old, in the arms of trusted nannies in the waiting area. The judge, a middle-aged man with gentle eyes, looked at the couple over his glasses. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, after an extensive review of your case, I'm convinced that you not only have the means, but also the love and commitment necessary to raise these 6 girls. It is with great pleasure that I grant the official adoption of Emma Olivia Ava, Sophia Isabella, and Mia Thornton." The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, sealing the fate of the new Thompson family. Jen let out a sob of joy, while Rick, usually so composed, felt tears rolling down his cheeks. Minutes later, with the girls in their arms, Rick and Jen left the courthouse to face a small crowd of reporters and onlookers who had gathered upon hearing about the unusual adoption case. "Mr. Thornton, Mrs. Thornton," the reporters shouted, camera flashes lighting up. "How do you feel? What would you say to those who question your decision to adopt 6 babies at once?" Rick, holding Abby and Harper in his arms, looked at Jen, who held Scarlett and Maddie, while the nannies carried Chloe and Emmy. With a smile that reflected both joy and determination, he turned to the reporters. "What we'd say is simple. Love has no limits. These girls came into our lives in a way we can't explain, but have accepted as the greatest gift we've ever received. They are our daughters, and we will do everything in our power to ensure they grow up happy, healthy, and loved." Jen, tears of happiness in her eyes, added, "We know that there's a long road ahead, and there will be challenges, but we're ready. These girls are our miracle, and every day with them is a blessing." As they left the courthouse, now officially a family of 8, Rick and Jen knew they were embarking on the greatest adventure of their lives. The mystery of how the girls appeared still loomed, an enigma that might never be fully solved, but in that moment, looking at their daughters' smiling faces, they were certain of one thing. The love they felt was real, strong, and more than enough to face any challenge the future might bring. The Thompson estate, once a symbol of wealth and business success, now became the home of a unique family, united not by blood, but by a love that defied all odds. And as the sun set on that historic day, 6 little stars shone brighter than ever in the Thompson sky, promising a future filled with joys, challenges, and above all, unconditional love. Morning at the Thompson estate was no longer marked by the contemplative silence Rick and Jen once knew. Now the first rays of sun were accompanied by a chorus of cries, laughter, and coos echoing through the halls, announcing the start of another day in the life of the newly formed family. Rick, with dark circles under his eyes but a permanent smile on his face, entered the girls' room, where Jen was already rocking Maddie. "Good morning, my princesses," he whispered, immediately greeted by 6 pairs of curious eyes and toothless grins. The chaos was constant, but there was an indescribable beauty in it. Each day brought new challenges and small victories that made it all worthwhile. Feeding time was an almost military operation. Jen had developed a color-coded system for each baby's bottle, ensuring they all got the right amount at the right time. "Abby, the pink one is yours," she'd say, while Rick tried to convince Scarlett to accept the green bottle. Diaper changes were true adventures. Rick, who once negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, now found himself celebrating whenever he managed to close a diaper without any accidents. "Linda, I did it Mia's clean and dry," he announced with the same enthusiasm he'd used to close a big deal, still slipping into old names in his exhaustion. Nights were long, with the couple taking turns to handle the baby's cries. Often, Jen found Rick asleep in the rocking chair in the girls' nursery, Chloe comfortably snuggled against his chest. In those moments, her heart overflowed with love for the family they had built. As the weeks passed, each girl's unique personality became clearer. Abby, always the first to wake, seemed to have inherited Rick's determination. Harper, with her watchful eyes, missed no detail of what went on around her. Scarlett, the most strong-willed, made sure she was heard at all times. Maddie was the dreamer, often lost in her own little fantasy world. Chloe, with her constant smile, was a ray of sunshine, even on the most tiring days. And Emmy, the youngest, clung to her mother, always seeking Jen's lap. The first smile, the first time rolling over, the first babbled words. Each milestone was celebrated as though it were an Olympic achievement. Rick once delayed an important business meeting because Scarlett had just managed to sit on her own for the first time. "This is more important than any contract," he told his astonished assistant Ashley while filming the event on his phone. But it wasn't all wonderful. Exhaustion often led to moments of frustration and doubt. There were nights when Jen, overwhelmed, questioned whether they were doing the right thing. "What if we're not good enough for them, Robert?" she whispered one night, tears of fatigue streaming down her cheeks. Rick, equally tired but determined, held her close. "We're exactly what they need, Linda. The love we have for them is more than enough. We'll learn together one day at a time." It was in this context of unconditional love mixed with controlled chaos that Sarah entered their lives. The 28-year-old nanny, Sarah Miller, arrived with impeccable references, but it was her calm demeanor and immediate connection with the girls that won Rick and Jen over. Sarah seemed to have a sixth sense when it came to the baby's needs. She knew exactly when Emmy needed extra cuddles or when Scarlett was about to have one of her famous tantrums. Her presence brought a welcome balance to the estate's frantic routine. "It's like she was born for this," Jen commented to Rick one evening, watching Sarah tell a story to the girls, each child hanging on every word. "Look how they adore her," Rick nodded, a mix of gratitude and relief on his face. "She's a godsend, Linda, with Sarah here. Maybe we can finally have a full night's sleep." Sarah's presence allowed Rick and Jen to find a new equilibrium. They could devote individual quality time to each of the girls, knowing the others were in good hands. Sarah also brought fresh ideas and activities, turning the daily routine into learning and fun moments. One sunny afternoon marked a special moment for the family. Rick had canceled all his appointments, determined to spend every second with his daughters. In the estate's backyard, a picnic was set up with colorful blankets laid on the grass and a variety of treats suitable for toddlers. Jen watched, her heart full, as Rick tried to teach the girls to clap in time with a children's song. Abby, always the leader, picked it up quickly, while Harper watched carefully before trying. Impatient Scarlet preferred to pat the grass, raising small clouds of dust and laughing at her own mischief. Sarah joined them, carrying Maddie, who had just woken from a nap. "Look who decided to join the party," she announced, placing a sleepy Maddie next to her sisters. It was at that moment, with the sun setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, that Jen had an epiphany. Looking at her family, Rick with Chloe in his lap, laughing at something Sarah had said, the girls scattered around the blanket, each on her own adventure, she realized she had everything she'd ever dreamed of. "Robert," she called softly, her voice thick with emotion. When he looked at her, Jen continued, "Look at us. Look at our family. Can you believe that a year ago we were here alone in this mansion, wishing for this?" Rick looked around, his eyes shining with unspoken tears. It's a miracle, Linda. Every day with them is a miracle. As the first year came to an end, marked by an extravagant celebration that Rick insisted on throwing, even though the girls were too young to remember, the Thompson family reflected on the incredible journey they had lived. The 6 high chairs, each decorated with one of the girls' names, were lined up at the large dining table. Balloons, ribbons, and an elaborate castle-shaped cake completed the decor. Sarah, who had become an indispensable part of the family, helped seat each girl, adjusting bows and wiping smiling faces. When everyone was ready, Rick raised his glass in a toast. "To our family," he began, his voice full of emotion. "To Linda, my rock, my partner. In this crazy, wonderful adventure, to our miraculous daughters, Emma, Olivia, Ava, Sophia, Isabella, and Mia, who've brought more joy into our lives than we ever imagined possible. And to Sarah, without whom we would never have survived this first year." Jen, tears in her eyes, raised her glass. "To every smile, every tear, every sleepless night, and every moment of pure happiness, to the love that grows each day, and to the bright future we have ahead." As glasses clinked and the girls clapped, or in Scarlett's case, slapped the tray of her high chair, no one could predict the challenges and revelations the future held. But in that moment, surrounded by love and joy, the Thompson family was complete, united, and ready to face anything life might bring. The Thompson girls' first birthday was marked by an extravagant celebration that contrasted with the simplicity and innocence of the tiny birthday girls themselves. The estate, adorned with colorful balloons and glittering ribbons, looked like a fairy tale come to life. Rick, in his characteristic generosity, spared no expense to make the day unforgettable, even if the girls themselves were too young to form lasting memories of the event. Jen, watching her daughters in their matching little dresses, yet each reacting uniquely to the festive commotion, couldn't help reflecting on how their personalities had blossomed over the past year. Abby, sitting upright in her high chair, observed everything with an almost adult-like curiosity, her bright blue eyes taking in every detail. Harper, always the calm one, was content to quietly play with a piece of cake, seemingly oblivious to the hustle and bustle. Scarlett, on the other hand, demanded to be the center of attention, clapping and shouting happily whenever someone approached. Maddie, with her dreamy look, seemed more interested in the paper butterflies decorating the ceiling than in the party itself. Chloe couldn't stop smiling, her laughter echoing through the room and bringing smiles to all the guests. And Emmy, true to her role as the clingy youngest, held tightly to Jen, watching the party with a mix of fascination and apprehension. "It's amazing how different they all are, isn't it?" Rick commented, approaching Jen with 2 glasses of champagne. 6 identical faces, 6 completely distinct personalities. Jen nodded, accepting the glass with a smile. Every day is a new discovery with them. Yesterday I found Emma reading a book to her sisters. Of course, she was just making up the story based on the pictures, but the seriousness in her expression, it was adorable. Rick laughed, his eyes shining with fatherly pride. "I wouldn't be surprised if she's the first to actually learn to read, although Olivia might surprise us. She observes everything so intently." As the couple talked, Sarah moved among the girls, making sure they were all comfortable and happy. Jen couldn't help noticing the special tenderness with which the nanny treated each child. It was more than mere professional dedication. There was a deep emotional connection there. "Sarah has been a blessing, hasn't she?" Jen remarked, watching the young nanny gently wipe frosting off Scarlett's face. "The girls adore her," Rick nodded, following his wife's gaze. "Yes, she has a special way with them. It's almost like—" "Like what?" Jen asked, curious about his hesitation. "Nothing," he replied, shaking his head as if to chase away a thought. "It's just that sometimes it seems like she knows them better than we do." Jen frowned slightly, but before she could elaborate on Rick's comment, a sharp cry cut through the air. Scarlett had decided it was time to try walking on her own and was wobbling dangerously close to the cake table. In a flash, Sarah was there, catching Scarlett before she could fall. The nanny's reaction was so quick, so instinctive, that for a moment Jen wondered if Sarah had eyes in the back of her head. "Wow, good reflexes, Sarah," Rick praised, rushing over to check if Scarlett was okay. Sarah smiled, but Jen noticed a flicker of something in her eyes. Worry? Guilt? It was so quick that Jen almost believed she had imagined it. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," Sarah replied softly, rocking Scarlett, who was now laughing off the scare. "I guess I've developed a sixth sense for their movements." As the party went on and evening approached, Jen found herself observing Sarah more carefully. The nanny's dedication was unquestionable, but there were moments when her reactions seemed different, like when Chloe began crying for no apparent reason and Sarah immediately knew it was because her favorite teddy bear had fallen behind the sofa, a toy Jen didn't even know existed. Or when Maddie, normally so calm, had a crying fit at bedtime. Sarah not only calmed her in minutes, but also casually mentioned she always gets like this on nights with a full moon, a connection Jen, the mother, had never noticed. These small observations, seemingly insignificant on their own, began to accumulate in Jen's mind, forming an incomplete and intriguing puzzle. Late that night, with the girls finally asleep and the estate quiet after the festivities, Jen found Rick in his study, reviewing some documents. "How are they sleeping?" he asked, taking off his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. Jen nodded, sitting in the chair in front of his desk. "Yes, thanks to Sarah, she has a magic touch with them." Rick smiled, but noticed the hesitation in his wife's voice. "Is something bothering you?" Jen bit her lip, unsure how to express her thoughts. "Robert, have you ever wondered about Sarah's past?" Rick frowned, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I'm not sure," Jen admitted nervously, fidgeting with the edge of her blouse. "It's just that sometimes she seems to know things about the girls that even we don't, and there are moments I catch her looking at them with this intense expression, almost sad." Rick leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Well, she spends a lot of time with them. It's natural she knows their habits and preferences." "Yes, but—" Jen hesitated, feeling a bit foolish for her suspicions. "It's more than that today. While I was helping tidy the girls' room, I found Sarah looking at an old photo. She quickly hid it when she saw me, but I'm sure I saw 6 babies in that picture." Rick raised his eyebrows, surprised. "6 babies? That's go peculiar." Jen nodded, feeling more confident in her observations. "And there's more. Last week I heard Sarah singing a lullaby to Mia. It was a melody I'd never heard before, but Mia seemed to recognize it instantly. She stopped crying at once." Rick was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. "You think Sarah might have some connection to the girls' past, to their origins?" Jen sighed, running her hands through her hair. "I don't know, Robert. Maybe I'm seeing things where there's nothing. She's been wonderful full with them, and we have no reason to distrust her, but your mother's instinct is telling you something," Rick said, understanding. Jen nodded, grateful for her husband's support. "Exactly. I don't want to accuse Sarah of anything. She's been incredible, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to her story than we know." Rick stood, rounding the desk to wrap Jen in a hug. "I get it, sweetheart. How about we do a little discreet checking? We can dig deeper into Sarah's past just to be sure there's nothing we should worry about." Jen relaxed in her husband's arms, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I think that would be wise. I don't want to be paranoid, but when it comes to the girl, you can never be too careful," Rick concluded. "We'll do it quietly. Sarah has been a blessing to our family, and we don't want to wrong her, but the safety and well-being of our daughters come first." As the couple prepared for bed that night, the mystery surrounding Sarah and her connection to the girls hung in the air like a subtle mist. The sextuplets slept peacefully in their cribs, unaware of the concerns and suspicions forming in their parents' minds. Jen, lying in bed, couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's expression when looking at the girls. It was love, no doubt, but there was something else. Perhaps a shadow of sadness, a hidden secret. As sleep finally overtook her, Jen knew that the coming days would bring new discoveries. The mystery of her daughter's origins, which seemed to have dissipated in the joy of the first year, was now resurfacing, carrying new questions and potentially revelations that could change everything. Rick Thompson's study had always been a sanctuary of order and efficiency. Neatly stacked documents, screens displaying complex charts, and the quiet hum of high-end equipment created an atmosphere of total control. But that morning, the billionaire was restless, his eyes fixed on a yellowed file that clashed with the modernity around him. "Emily Wilson," he murmured, running his fingers over the name on the folder's cover, an employee who had worked at his company nearly 3 years ago, disappearing mysteriously shortly before the sextuplets were born. Rick couldn't explain why this case in particular had resurfaced in his mind. Perhaps it was Jen's words about Sarah, or maybe just intuition, but something pushed him to investigate more deeply. Leafing through the documents, Rick came across a photo. Emily Wilson gave the camera a shy smile, her green eyes shining with hope. There was something familiar in that gaze, something he couldn't define. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Thornton," it was his assistant, Ashley. "Sorry to bother you, but I thought you might want to see this. I found more files related to Mrs. Sullivan, including her letter of resignation." Rick raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Resignation letter? I thought she'd just vanished." Ashley handed him another folder. "Apparently she emailed it a day before she stopped coming to work. It's strange to say the least." Opening the new folder, Rick felt a chill run down his spine. The email was short, almost cryptic. "Dear Sir, Madam, circumstances beyond my control force me to leave my position immediately. I thank you for the opportunity and apologize for any inconvenience. Sincerely, Emily Sullivan." "Karen, I want you to conduct a full investigation on Emily Sullivan background, family, friends, everything, and keep this between us, please," he instructed, slipping into the old name for his previous assistant in his haste. Meanwhile, at the Thompson estate, Jen watched Sarah interact with the girls in the backyard. The sextuplets, now 2 years old, ran and played with the boundless energy typical of their age. Sarah, always attentive, seemed to predict their every move and need. Jen couldn't help noticing how Sarah's face lit up at seeing the girls happy, but also how shadows of sadness sometimes clouded her eyes. "Sarah," Jen called, approaching with a tray of snacks. "Are you all right? You seem a bit distant today." The young nanny blinked rapidly, as if emerging from a trance. "Oh, Mrs. Thoren, sorry, I was just remembering." "Remembering?" Jen asked gently, sitting beside Sarah. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her eyes drifting to the backyard where the girls were playing. Today is a special day for me. Or it used to be. It's my mother's birthday." Jen felt a wave of sympathy. "Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. Your mother? She passed away a few years ago," Sarah finished, a sad smile flickering over her lips. "But it's all right. Seeing the girls happy somehow makes me feel closer to her." Jen placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder, but couldn't help noticing how the young woman seemed tense at her touch. There was more to this story, Jen was sure, but before she could ask further, a piercing shout cut through the air. "Mommy Sarah, look what I found!" It was Scarlett, proudly holding what looked like a small music box she had dug out of the sandbox. Sarah turned visibly pale at the sight of the object. Where did you find that, sweetheart?" Her voice trembled slightly. Oblivious to the nanny's reaction, Scarlett turned the box's handle. A soft melody filled the air, the same lullaby Jen had heard Sarah sing to Emmy weeks ago. The other girls, drawn by the music, approached. To Jen's surprise, they all seemed to recognize the tune, their little faces lighting up with smiles. "That song?" Jen began, looking at Sarah questioningly, but the nanny was already standing, muttering something about needing to check on something inside, and hurried away, leaving Jen perplexed and the girls happily humming the familiar melody. That evening, after putting the girls to bed, Jen found Rick in his study, both of them exchanging worried looks. "I found something," Rick began, showing Jen Emily Wilson's file. "She's a former employee who disappeared mysteriously nearly 3 years ago." Jen examined the photo, her eyes widening. "Robert, she looks a bit like Sarah, don't you think?" Rick nodded gravely. "I thought the same thing, and the date of her disappearance matches the time the girls must have been born," Jen finished, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "There's more," Rick continued. "I asked Karen to dig deeper. Emily Sullivan had no close family except for an older brother. Guess what his name is?" Jen felt her heart quicken. "It can't be Michael Sullivan," Rick confirmed, his voice heavy. "My brother." The silence that followed was deafening. The implications of this revelation were huge and potentially devastating. "Robert," Jen finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "Do you think Sarah could be Emily?" "It's possible," Rick answered, running his hands over his tired face. "But why would she change her identity, and why abandon the girls only to come back as their nanny?" Jen related the day's events, Sarah's reaction to the music box, and how the girls seemed to recognize the melody. "There are so many little things, Robert, the way she knows each girl's habits, how she anticipates their needs like a mother would," Rick concluded, the weight of realization upon them. In the days that followed, Rick and Jen watched Sarah even more closely, noticing details they'd overlooked before. How Sarah always knew exactly which blanket each girl preferred, or how she could distinguish hunger cries from sleepy cries, even at a distance. One afternoon, Jen walked past Sarah's room and found her crying silently, looking at an old photo. Before Jen could withdraw, Sarah noticed her presence. "Mrs. Thornton," she exclaimed, hastily putting the photo away. I didn't hear you coming," Jen, making a sudden decision, entered the room. "Sarah, we're worried about you. You know you can talk to us right if there's anything you want to share." For a moment it seemed Sarah might open up. Her eyes filled with tears, and she opened her mouth as if to speak, but then, as if reminded of something, she steadied herself. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I really appreciate your concern. I'm just a bit emotional today. That's all." Jen nodded, sensing she had missed a crucial opportunity. As she left the room, she couldn't help noticing a small newspaper clipping partially hidden under some papers on Sarah's desk. The headline said something about a controversial genetic experiment. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries for the Thompson family. The girls, now fully 2 years old, were becoming more active and curious every day. Their vocabularies expanded daily, and with that came questions Rick and Jen weren't prepared to answer. It was on a sunny afternoon that Abby, always the most perceptive of the sextuplets, asked the question everyone had feared. "Mommy, why don't we look like you and Daddy?" Jen felt her heart skip a beat. She looked at Rick, who had just entered the room, seeking his support. But before either of them could formulate a response, Sarah intervened gently. "Some families are formed by the heart, not by blood, Emma. Your parents chose you because they love you more than anything in the world." Abby seemed to consider this for a moment, before smiling and returning to play with her sisters. Jen and Rick exchanged significant looks, impressed by Sarah's skillful handling of the situation. As the days passed, it became increasingly evident that Sarah possessed an almost uncanny knowledge of the girls. She knew exactly when Maddie was about to have one of her recurring nightmares or when Emmy needed a hug for no apparent reason. One night, during a particularly strong storm, all the girls woke up frightened. While Rick and Jen raced from one room to another, trying to calm them, Sarah appeared with a large basket of lavender. The scent calms them, she explained, placing small lavender sachets under the girls' pillows. Within minutes, they were all sleeping peacefully. "How did you know that?" Jen asked, amazed. Sarah hesitated a moment before answering. "My mother? She always said lavender soothed babies during storms." Rick, watching quietly, noticed how Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she tucked in the girls. There was such care, such a deep love in her gestures that went beyond mere professional duty. As Rick's investigation into Emily Wilson continued, more questions arose. How could a seemingly ordinary employee at his company be connected to a controversial genetic experiment? And what was her link to his brother Michael, whom he hadn't seen in years? One night, while everyone slept, Rick found Jen in the office, rummaging through some old documents. "What are you looking for?" he asked, curious. Jen looked up, a mix of triumph and apprehension in her eyes. "Remember that fertility clinic we visited years ago? I found some old brochures." "Robert, look at this." She handed him a time-yellowed pamphlet. On the cover, in discreet lettering, was the name: Dr. Michael Sullivan, Fertility Specialist and Advanced Genetic Research. "My God," Rick muttered, feeling the puzzle pieces begin to fall into place. "Linda, do you think that your brother may have been involved in the girl's birth?" "Yes, I'm starting to believe so," Jen finished, her voice barely a whisper. Silence followed, heavy with implications and possibilities neither was fully prepared to face. "What do we do now?" Jen finally asked, her eyes searching Rick's for guidance. Rick took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "We need to find out the truth, Linda, for the girl's safety, for us, and for Sarah, whoever she really is." As the Thompson couple prepared to uncover the mysteries surrounding their daughter's past and Sarah's true identity, in the girls' room, 6 identical pairs of eyes opened simultaneously in the darkness, as if responding to a silent call. The sextuplets got out of their beds, moving in perfect sync toward the window. Outside, the full moon bathed the garden in its silvery light, and for a brief moment, the girls seemed to share a secret not even they fully understood, a secret that would soon shake the foundations of everything the Thompson family believed they knew about love, family, and the incredible power of the bond between mother and children. Autumn arrived at the Thompson estate, bringing a cool breeze and golden leaves dancing across the vast backyard. Rick gazed out his study window, watching Sarah play with the girls outside, his heart heavy with the latest discoveries. On the desk before him lay an open file, revealing a surprising truth. Sarah Miller, the devoted nanny who had cared for his daughters for nearly 2 years, did not exist until shortly before she was hired. "Sarah Dorson," Rick murmured, running his fingers over the nanny's real name. The photos showed the same person, yet with a completely different past from what she had told them. A gentle knock at the door broke his concentration. It was Jen, her face a blend of worry and determination. "Did you find anything?" she asked, approaching the desk. Rick nodded gravely, handing her the file. "Sarah isn't who she says she is. She changed her identity before coming to work for us." Jen examined the documents, her eyes widening. "But why? Why would she lie about her identity?" "I don't know," Rick replied, running his hands over his tired face. "But whatever the reason, it must be serious enough for her to start a whole new life." Jen sank into the chair across from the desk, her mind spinning with implications. "What do we do now? Do we confront her?" Rick hesitated. "I'm not sure that's the best approach. She's obviously hiding something, but she's also been amazing with the girls. We can't ignore that." Before they could discuss it further, a scream from the backyard interrupted them. They both ran to the window, hearts pounding, to see Sarah carrying Maddie, who looked pale and listless. Minutes later, they were all in the living room. Maddie, normally so energetic, lay on the couch, her small body trembling despite the blanket around her. "What happened?" Jen asked, kneeling beside her daughter. Sarah, visibly shaken, explained she was playing normally and suddenly went pale and started shaking. Her temperature is shooting up. Rick was already on the phone, calling the family doctor, Dr. Davis. Jen, meanwhile, noticed something strange about Sarah's behavior. The nanny looked more than worried. There was a deep fear and knowledge in her eyes. "Sarah," Jen began, deciding to approach carefully. "You seem extremely concerned. Have you seen something like this before?" Sarah hesitated, her glance darting between Maddie and Rick and Jen's worried faces. I've cared for children with similar symptoms before. I'm just really worried about Sophia," she said, mixing up the names in her panic. Jen wasn't entirely convinced, but before she could press further, the doctor arrived. Dr. Davis, a middle-aged man with a reassuring presence, examined Maddie carefully. "Well," he said, his expression serious, "it looks like more than a simple flu. The symptoms suggest a rare genetic condition. I'll need to run some tests to be sure, but having the family medical history would be very helpful." Rick and Jen exchanged anguished looks. "Doctor," Rick began hesitantly, "the girls are adopted. We don't have any information about their biological parents." Dr. Davis frowned, clearly concerned. "I see that complicates matters. I'll need to do a series of tests. It might be Rett syndrome." Sarah's voice cut through the tension, surprising everyone. The doctor turned, surprised. "Pardon me," Sarah, appearing to battle an internal conflict, went on. "Her symptoms. They match our syndrome. It's a rare genetic disorder that mainly affects girls." Dr. Davis looked at Sarah with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "You're correct, but how do you know so much about the specific genetic markers for our syndrome?" Sarah paled slightly, realizing she might have revealed more than she intended. I've been reading a lot about it since Sophia got sick. I wanted to be as prepared as possible to help, again using a different name in her stress." Rick and Jen exchanged significant looks. Sarah's knowledge far exceeded what one would expect from simply reading about it. There was something more, an intimate familiarity with the condition. While Sarah continued discussing medical details with Dr. Davis, Jen felt an unease grow in her chest. The questions that had accumulated in her mind over the past few weeks now demanded answers. That night, with Rick staying at the hospital with Maddie, Jen returned to the estate to care for the other girls and try to rest. Passing by Sarah's bedroom, she noticed the door was slightly open, unusual given how careful the nanny was about her privacy. Hesitantly, Jen pushed the door ajar, telling herself she only wanted to check if everything was in order. The room was spotless as always, but one out-of-place object caught her eye: a brown notebook partially hidden under the pillow. Jen knew she shouldn't, that she was invading Sarah's privacy, but her need to understand, to protect her daughters, overshadowed her hesitation. With trembling hands, she picked up the notebook and opened it. The first pages contained seemingly innocent notes about the girls' schedules, food preferences, and developmental milestones. But as Jen flipped further, her heart began to pound. The entries became more detailed, more personal. Today, Emma said her first word, "A mama?" My heart nearly stopped for a moment. I forgot I can't answer that. I can't hold her and tell her how much I love her. Being a silent observer is the heaviest burden I've ever carried. Jen felt her legs give way and sat on Sarah's bed, unable to stop reading. Ava had another nightmare. I remember how frequent they were in the early months. I quietly sang the lullaby that used to soothe them when they were babies. It worked like magic, even though she doesn't consciously know why. Page after page, Jen discovered intimate details about her daughters, observations and emotions far beyond a nanny's role. Sarah wasn't just caring for the girls, she knew them in a deep, almost maternal way. One passage in particular sent chills through Jen. "Today is the girl's second birthday, 2 years since I made the hardest decision of my life. Seeing them grow happy and loved gives me strength to go on, but the pain of not being able to call them mine, of having to hide the truth, is almost unbearable. Robert and Linda are wonderful parents. But oh, how it hurts to watch another couple live the life that should have been mine." Jen abruptly closed the notebook, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd just read. Sarah wasn't just a devoted nanny. She had a deep personal connection to the girls, a connection dating back to their birth. Heart heavy and mind filled with questions, Jen replaced the notebook where she'd found it and silently left the room. She had to talk to Rick immediately. At the hospital, Rick sat beside Maddie's bed, holding her tiny hand as she slept. The constant beeping of monitors was the only sound in the silent room. When Jen entered, the look on her face immediately told him something was wrong. "Linda, what happened?" he asked, standing to meet her. Jen quietly closed the door before turning to her husband, her eyes brimming with tears. "Robert, I think we found something out about Sarah, something huge." She then recounted her discovery of the diary, sharing the passages she had memorized, her voice trembling with every revelation. Rick listened intently, shock and growing concern etched on his face. "My God," he muttered when Jen finished. "So you think she might be the girl's biological mother," Jen completed, the reality of the situation finally taking shape in words. "Yes, I think so, or at least she has a very close connection to their birth." Rick ran his hands over his face, trying to process the enormity of it all. That would explain so much: her detailed knowledge of the girls, her almost obsessive dedication, the change of identity. "And now her understanding of Sophia's condition," Jen added. "Robert, what do we do?" Before Rick could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Sarah, looking exhausted but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she began, "but I think I have an idea about Sophia's treatment. I've been researching," and she trailed off, noticing the tense atmosphere and the intense way Rick and Jen were looking at her. Is everything okay?" Rick and Jen exchanged a quick glance, silently communicating. It was Jen who finally spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "Sarah, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about you, about the girls, about the truth." Sarah visibly paled, her entire body tensing. For a moment, it looked like she might run, but then her shoulders slumped in resignation. I knew this day would come eventually," she whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I just hoped for more time." Rick approached, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We're not here to judge you, Sarah. We just want to understand for Sophia's sake. For all the girl, we need to know the truth." Sarah nodded slowly, wiping away a stray tear. "You're right. It's time for the truth, but it's a long, complicated story, and I'm afraid that once you know everything, nothing will ever be the same." As the three prepared for a conversation that would change their lives forever, Maddie stirred in her sleep, as if sensing the tension in the air. Outside the hospital window, the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It was the end of one day, but the beginning of a new reality for the Thompson family, one where the secrets of the past would finally come to light, bringing with them the power to redefine everything they believed about family, love, and sacrifice. The hospital room was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the steady beep of the monitors attached to little Maddie. Sarah sat on the edge of a stiff chair, her hands trembling slightly as she faced Rick and Jen's expectant gazes. "Where do I start?" Sarah murmured, more to herself than to the others. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to reveal the truth she had guarded for so long. "My real name is Emily Sullivan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm the girl's biological mother." The revelation, though suspected, still hit the room like a bomb. Jen gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth, while Rick slumped against the wall, his eyes fixed on Sarah. Emily, as they now knew her, how Linda began, her voice failing. "How is that possible?" Emily wiped away a tear rolling down her cheek before continuing. 3 years ago, I was a promising scientist working on a highly classified genetic research project. The official goal was to study and develop treatments for rare genetic diseases. At least that's what we were told. She paused, looking at Maddie sleeping. I was young, idealistic, convinced we were doing something revolutionary that could help thousands of people. But I was wrong, terribly wrong. Rick, who had remained silent until then, finally found his voice. "What did you discover? The truth behind the project," Emily replied, her face hardening at the memory. "We weren't developing cures, we were creating something else, genetic modifications that went far beyond medical ethics when I realized the true nature of the experiments I tried to expose them." Jen scooted closer, sitting next to Emily. "What happened? They threatened me," Emily continued, her voice trembling. "They said if I talked, they'd use me as a test subject. I was terrified, but I couldn't ignore what was happening, so I decided to sabotage the project from the inside." Emily took a deep breath before going on. "I used my own genetic material thinking I could control the outcome, but something went wrong or right, depending on your perspective. Instead of a single embryo, I ended up with 6 perfectly viable, perfectly healthy, or so I believed at the time." "The girls," Jen whispered, finally understanding. Emily nodded, tears now streaming freely. "When I discovered I was pregnant with sextuplets, I panicked. I knew couldn't leave them in the hands of those scientists, so I ran. I spent months in hiding, moving from town to town, always afraid of being found." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the soft sounds of medical equipment. Rick and Jen exchanged glances, trying to process the magnitude of Emily's revelations. "Why us?" Rick asked at last. "Why our door?" Emily looked at them with tearful eyes. "I did my research, a lot of it. I had to find people who could not only give the girls a comfortable life, but who would love them unconditionally. I watched you for weeks before making my decision. I saw how generous you were, how desperately you wanted children, and then you came back as the nanny," Jen finished, a hint of accusation in her voice. Emily lowered her head, guilt evident in every line of her posture. "I tried to stay away. I swear I did. But your parents, you can imagine how it feels to watch your children grow and not be able to tell them who you are, not be able to hold them when they cry, not be able to." Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. Jen, despite her own emotional turmoil, felt a pang of compassion. Voices echoed in the hallway. The other girls were arriving with the nurse who had been watching them. Emily quickly tried to compose herself, wiping away tears. Abby was the first to enter the room, her sharp eyes immediately noticing the tense atmosphere. "Mommy, why is Sarah crying?" Jen felt her heart clench at the innocent question. How could they explain something so complex to an almost 3-year-old? "Sarah's just worried about Sophia, sweetie," Rick interjected gently, picking Abby up, another name slip in the stressful moment. The other girls followed, each reacting in her own way to the tension in the room. Scarlett, always the most emotional, ran to hug Sarah. "Don't cry, Sarah. Sophia's going to be okay." Emily hugged Scarlett, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. The moment was simultaneously sweet and painful to witness. "I think we should continue this conversation later," Jen suggested, noticing how the girls seemed to sense the charged atmosphere of the room. Rick nodded, putting Abby down. "Girls, how about we go to the cafeteria for a snack?" While Rick led the children away, Jen stayed behind with Emily and Maddie. The silence between the two women was heavy with unspoken words. "Linda," Emily finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "I know you must hate me now. I don't hate you," Jen interrupted, surprising them both with the firmness in her voice. "I'm hurt, confused, scared, but I don't hate you. How could I? You gave us the greatest gift we've ever received." Emily looked at Jen in surprise. "Even after knowing I lied to you all this time," Jen let out a deep sigh. "You did what you felt you had to do to protect your daughters as a mother. I can understand that. What I don't know is how we move forward from here. I don't want to take them away from you," Emily said quickly. "You and Robert are their parents in every way that matters. I'm eternally grateful for that. I just want to be able to keep being part of their lives, even if it's only a Sarah, the nanny." Jen looked at Maddie, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding around her. "I don't know if that's possible now, Emily, not after knowing the truth, and there are still so many questions about their father," Emily asked softly. Jen nodded. "Among other things, but mostly about the future. How do we protect the girls? How do we deal with their medical condition? How do we explain all this to them when they're older?" Emily stood, walking to the hospital window. "I don't have all the answers, Linda, but I know that together we can find a way for them." Rick's return with the girls interrupted their conversation. The children came in carrying small snacks and juices, apparently happier after the break. "Sarah," Chloe called, offering half of her sandwich, "we got some for you too." The innocent gesture of love made Emily smile through her tears. Jen watched, her heart torn between maternal protectiveness and compassion. Robert Linda called softly, "I think we need to talk in private." The couple stepped out into the hallway, leaving Emily with the girls. Through the window into the room, they could see how the children naturally gravitated toward her, seeking her comfort and attention. "What do we do?" Jen asked, her voice trembling slightly. Rick ran his hands over his tired face. "I don't know, sweetheart. This is bigger than anything we could have imagined, but one thing is certain, we have to think of the girls first." Jen nodded. "She has crucial knowledge about their condition, about their genetic risks. We can't just send her away." "No," Rick agreed, "but we can't continue as if nothing has changed either, and there's more to this story, Linda. I can feel it. She hasn't told us everything yet." Jen looked back into the room, where Emily was now reading a story to the girls, her soft voice drifting through the glass. "You know what's hardest, seeing how they love her, how they trust her instinctively. Maybe they always knew." Knew somehow, Rick hugged Jen, offering silent comfort. "We'll figure it out, my love, one step at a time." Inside the room, Emmy had fallen asleep in Emily's lap, while the other girls snuggled around her, listening to the story. Maddie had awakened and was watching the scene with sleepy eyes. It was an image of pure, unconditional love, complicated by the newly revealed truth looming over them like a storm cloud. Night fell over the hospital, bringing the promise of inevitable changes. The Thompson family was on the brink of a profound transformation, and no one knew exactly what daybreak would bring. But one thing was certain: the love for the 6 little girls who had brought their lives together in such unexpected ways would guide any decision that had to be made. Emily looked at the sleeping children around her, her heart filled with love and regret. More truths would need to be revealed, more secrets shared, but for now, in this moment of calm before the next storm, she allowed herself to be grateful just to be there, surrounded by the love of her daughters, even though they didn't know who she really was. The future was uncertain, but love, in all its complex and unexpected forms, was the only certainty they had. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of Rick's study in the Thompson estate, casting dancing shadows over the tense faces gathered inside. Rick, Jen, and Sarah sat in charged silence, the air heavy with the revelations of recent days and the promise of more truths to come. Sarah, or Emily as they now knew her, twisted her hands in her lap, her face a mask of anxiety and determination. "There's more you need to know," she began, her voice a mere whisper. Jen leaned forward, a mix of apprehension and curiosity in her eyes. More, what else could there be? Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It's about the girl's father, Hyan. I wasn't completely honest about how I got pregnant." Rick felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean? When I was working at the genetic research company," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. "I got involved with my boss. It was a complicated secret, but intense relationship." Jen and Rick exchanged surprised looks. "Are your boss?" Jen asked incredulously. Sarah nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Yes, and there's more." She looked directly at Rick, fear and regret filling her gaze. "Robert, the man I'm talking about is your brother Michael." The silence that followed was deafening. Rick felt as if the ground had been pulled from beneath his feet. His face went visibly pale, and for a moment it looked like he might pass out. "Michael," he finally managed, his voice hoarse with shock. "My brother Michael." Sarah nodded sadly. "Yes, I didn't know at first that you two were brothers. I only found out later when I researched you before leaving the girls here." Jen, who had remained silent, finally found her voice. "But how, Robert, you never mentioned Michael was involved in genetic research." Rick ran his hands over his face, trying to process. "I didn't know. I haven't seen Michael in years. We had a falling out. And, well, we lost touch. I had no idea what he was up to." Sarah continued her story, her voice quivering with suppressed emotion. "Michael was brilliant visionary. The project we were working on was revolutionary but also dangerous. When I realized the true nature of the experiments, I was horrified. I tried to convince him to stop, but he was obsessed with improving humanity." "Does he know about the girls?" Jen asked softly, her gaze shifting between Sarah and Rick. Sarah shook her head. "No. When I decided to sabotage the project and run, I didn't tell him about the pregnancy. I thought it would be safer for everyone if he never knew." Rick got up abruptly, pacing to the window. His mind spun with the implications of this revelation. His brother, whom he hadn't spoken to in years, was the girl's biological father. It was almost too much. "Robert," Jen called gently, concern in her voice. He turned slowly, meeting Sarah's gaze. "Are you sure, absolutely sure, that Michael is the father?" Sarah nodded firmly. "Yes, I'm sure the genetic tests we did as part of the experiment leave no doubt." Rick closed his eyes, feeling the weight of it all. When he opened them again, there was a mixture of pain and determination. "We have to tell him Michael has the right to know he's a father." Jen stood, placing a comforting hand on Rick's arm. "Are you sure, dear? This will change everything." Rick nodded slowly. "Yes, the girls deserve to know every aspect of their origin, and Michael, well, despite our past conflicts, he's my brother and their father." Sarah looked relieved by the decision, though fear was still evident in her eyes. What if he wants to be part of their lives? What if he tries to take them? "We won't let that happen," Jen said firmly, surprising everyone with the strength in her voice. "We're the legal parents of these girls, but maybe it's good for them to have more people loving them." Rick picked up the phone, his hands trembling slightly. "I'll call him now. Ask him to come here. This conversation needs to happen in person." The phone call was brief and tense. Michael, surprised by his brother's unexpected contact after so many years, agreed to come to the Thompson estate the next day. The hours that followed were filled with anxiety and preparations. Sarah shared more details of her relationship with Michael, of the research project, and of the possible risks and implications for the girls' health. Rick and Jen listened carefully, their minds working to absorb and process each new piece of information. The next morning, tension was palpable in the estate. The girls, sensitive as ever, seemed to sense something important was happening, though they didn't understand what. Sarah spent the morning with them, trying to maintain a semblance of normality, while her heart pounded at the thought of seeing Michael again. When the doorbell finally rang, announcing Michael's arrival, it felt as if time had stopped. Rick opened the door, facing the brother he hadn't seen in years. Michael looked older, with gray strands at his temples and worry lines around his eyes, but the determined, intelligent gaze Rick remembered so well was still there. "Robert," Michael said quietly, extending his hand. "Michael," Rick replied, accepting the handshake that quickly became a tense hug laden with years of distance and unresolved resentment. In the study, the atmosphere was electric. Michael looked surprised to see Sarah, clearly not expecting her presence. "Emily, what are you doing here?" he asked, confusion plain in his voice. Sarah took a step forward, tears glistening in her eyes. "Michael, there's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." Over the next 2 hours, the truth came out. Sarah explained the pregnancy, her flight, and how she had left the girls with Rick and Jen. Michael listened in silence, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. I'm a father, he finally managed, his voice choked with emotion, of sextuplets. Rick nodded gravely. Yes, Michael, you're their father, and I'm their adoptive father. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with conflicting emotions. Michael abruptly stood, walking to the window overlooking the backyard where the girls were playing, unaware of the emotional storm inside. They're beautiful, he whispered, watching the 6 identical girls run and laugh. Jen approached, placing a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. They're amazing, Michael, and now you have the chance to know them, to be part of their lives. Michael turned, tears streaming down his face. After all I've done, after all these years, what would you really accept me in their lives? Rick took a step forward, tension still visible in his posture, but determination in his eyes. Michael, what happened in the past? Well, we can't change it, but we can choose how we move forward for them. The hours that followed were filled with difficult conversations, careful plans, and surprisingly, moments of renewed connection between the brothers. Michael listened in fascination as Rick and Jen told stories about the girls, his eyes brimming with a mix of regret for lost time and hope for the future. Sarah, initially apprehensive about Michael's presence, gradually relaxed as she saw his genuine, loving reaction to the news of his daughters. How do we do this? Michael finally asked, looking at Rick, Jen, and Sarah. How do we integrate all of this in a way that's healthy for the girls, Jen, always the voice of reason, suggested. I think we should do it gradually. Introduce you first as a friend of the family, give the girls time to get used to you before we tell them the whole truth. Rick nodded in agreement. I agree, and we all need to be on the same page the girls are, and always will be, our #1 priority. Michael looked at his brother, gratitude shining in his eyes. Thank you, Robert, for taking care of them, for loving them, for giving me this chance. Sarah, who had been quiet for a while, finally spoke. Michael? I'm sorry I never told you before. I was so afraid. Michael turned to her, his expression softening. I understand, Emily, or should I say Sarah, you did what you thought was best to protect them. I can't blame you for that. As the day wore on, the time came for everyone's most anticipated and feared moment, introducing Michael to the girls. They decided to do it in the backyard, a familiar and comfortable setting for the children. When Michael stepped into the yard, the 6 girls stopped their play, looking curiously at the newcomer. Abby, always the natural leader, approached first. Hi, she said, her voice small but confident. Who are you? Michael knelt to her level, a trembling smile on his lips. Hi, Emma. I'm an old friend of your dad's, he said, the old name slipping out. One by one, the other girls joined them, each reacting in her own way to the new adult in their lives. Scarlett, always wary of strangers, hid behind Jen's legs. Maddie, however, immediately held out her hand to Michael, offering him a flower she'd picked. Watching the scene, Rick felt a jumble of emotions. Joy at seeing his brother interact with the girls, worry about how this would affect the family dynamic, hope that somehow they could create a new normal together. As the sun began to set, bathing the backyard in golden light, the adults gathered again in Rick's study to discuss the next steps. And we need clear ground rules, Rick began, looking directly at Michael. Linda and I are the girls' legal parents. That doesn't change. Michael nodded quickly. I completely understand and respect that, Jen added. But we want you to be part of their lives, Michael, in a way that's healthy and positive for everyone. Sarah, who had watched the backyard scene with a mix of emotions, spoke softly. The girls seem to like you, Michael. I think with time and patience, this can work. Rick looked at each person in turn, feeling the burden of responsibility, but also a renewed sense of hope. Let's do this, step by step, regular visits always supervised. At first, we'll build this relationship gradually." Michael, tears in his eyes, nodded. "Thank you, all of you. I know I don't deserve this second chance, but I promise I'll do everything I can to be the best father and uncle these girls could have." As night fell over the Thompson estate, a new family dynamic began to form. It was complex, unconventional, and full of potential challenges, but also filled with love, forgiveness, and the promise of a future in which 6 extraordinary girls would have more people to love and protect them. Rick, gazing at the city lights in the distance, reflected on life's unpredictability. Just weeks earlier, he believed his family was complete. Now it had expanded in ways he never could have imagined. Yes, it was frightening, but it was also exciting. With a final glance at the backyard where the girls were still playing under Jen and Sarah's watchful eyes, Rick made a silent promise. No matter what the future held, he would do everything in his power to ensure that his daughters, because that's how he saw them, regardless of biology, grew up surrounded by love, understanding, and support. The truth had been revealed, and though it was shocking and complicated, it also brought the opportunity for healing, reconciliation, and a new beginning for everyone involved. At the center of it all were 6 little girls, oblivious to the drama swirling around them, yet deeply loved by a family that had grown in unexpected and wonderful ways. The Thompson estate had been transformed into a fairy tale. Colorful balloons swayed in the gentle breeze, glittering ribbons draped the trees, and a huge banner read, "Happy 3rd birthday, Emma Olivia, Ava, Sophia, Isabella, and Mia." The children's laughter filled the air, blending with cheerful music playing in the background. Rick surveyed the scene with a smile, his heart overflowing with emotion. 3 years ago, 6 tiny miracles had entered his life, turning his world upside down in the most wonderful way possible. And now, after months of shocking revelations and emotional adjustments, here they were, celebrating not just the girl's birthday, but the birth of a new family dynamic. Jen approached, intertwining her fingers with his. "They look so happy," she murmured, watching the sextuplets run around, playing with other children. "Yes," Rick agreed, gently squeezing his wife's hand, "and look at Michael and Sarah." Across the backyard, Michael was kneeling, helping Maddie tie her shoe. His face shone with a smile, his eyes bright with paternal love. Nearby, Sarah watched, a mix of emotions crossing her face. In recent weeks, Michael had devoted himself fully to getting to know his daughters and making amends for the past. His transformation was remarkable. The once obsessed scientist had become a loving, attentive father. "Sarah," Michael called, standing up after helping Maddie. "Could we talk for a moment?" Sarah nodded, following him to a quieter corner of the garden. Rick and Jen watched from a distance, giving them privacy while staying alert for any sign of discomfort. "I want to apologize," Michael began, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything, for the Project Her, for not listening when you tried to warn me about the dangers, for putting you in that impossible position." Sarah looked him in the eye, tears forming. "Michael, please let me finish," he requested gently. "You were incredibly brave. You protected our daughters, gave them a chance at a normal, happy life, and now you've given me the opportunity to know them, to be part of their lives. I can never thank you enough." Sarah wiped away a tear. "Thank you, Michael. That means a lot to me, and seeing you with them, seeing how you've changed, it's more than I could have hoped for." Michael took Sarah's hands in his. "I promise you, Sarah, that I'll be the best father I can be. To them, I'll be present, supportive, love them unconditionally, and I hope that in time, you and I can build a friendship for the girls' sake." Sarah nodded, a genuine smile lighting her face. "I'd really like that." Across the backyard, Rick observed the moment with a swirl of feelings. His brother, once so distant, was now back in his life in a way he could never have imagined. "I think it's time," Jen whispered, giving Rick's arm a comforting squeeze. Rick took a deep breath and walked toward his brother. Michael, noticing him approach, looked momentarily apprehensive. "Michael," Rick began, his voice firm but kind, "we've been through a lot over the past few months, shocking revelations, intense emotions, drastic changes. But looking at you now, seeing how you've dedicated yourself to the girls, I think it's time we put the past behind us." Michael gazed at his brother, hope shining in his eyes. "Robert, why No, let me finish," Rick interrupted gently. "You're my brother Michael, and now you're also the biological father of my daughters. Our family may not be conventional, but it's ours, and I want us to make this work together." The two brothers stared at each other for a long moment before sharing a tight hug, years of resentment and distance dissolving in that single gesture. Jen, watching the scene, felt her heart fill with joy. She turned to Sarah, who stood beside her. "You know, when we discovered the truth about you, I was so scared of losing my daughters, scared everything we'd built would collapse, but now I see that we've gained so much more than we've lost." Sarah smiled, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Linda, you and Robert are the girls' parents in a way that matters. I'm forever grateful that you opened your hearts, not just to them, but to me and Michael as well." The two women embraced, a deep friendship and partnership in raising the girls cemented in that moment. "Mommy, Daddy, Uncle Michael, Sarah," Abby's excited voice cut through the air. "Time for cake." The family gathered around the large, decorated table where 6 identical cakes, each bearing one of the girls' names, awaited. The sextuplets, dressed in different shades of pink, buzzed with excitement as everyone sang "Happy Birthday." Rick looked around, his heart overflowing with love. Jen, his partner in everything, held Emmy in her arms. Sarah, the biological mother who had sacrificed so much, helped Scarlett and Chloe blow out their candles. Michael, the newly discovered father and uncle, laughed as Maddie tried to swipe a bit of frosting with her finger. And at the center of it all were 6 identical little girls, each unique in her own way, smiling and laughing, surrounded by more love than they could ever imagine. When the candles were blown out and the applause faded, Rick raised a champagne glass, calling for everyone's attention. "3 years ago," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "our lives changed forever. 6 tiny miracles entered our lives, bringing more joy, love, and yes, challenges than we ever could have imagined. But looking at all of you today, I see those challenges made us stronger." He paused, looking at each face around the table. Family isn't defined just by blood or legal papers, it's defined by love, choice, commitment, Kemma, Olivia, AA, Sophia, Isabella, and Mia. You're lucky enough to have not 2, but 4 adults who love you unconditionally. Linda, my incredible wife, thank you for your unwavering strength and love. Sarah, your courage and essay sacrifice brought us here. And Michael, my brother, welcome back to the family. Tears shimmered in everyone's eyes as Rick lifted his glass. To family, to our unique, imperfect, and absolutely wonderful family, may the years ahead be filled with love, laughter, and more moments like this. As glasses clinked and the girls gleefully dove into their cakes, the air was filled with a palpable sense of a new beginning. The challenges of the past had been overcome, the secrets revealed, and now, united by love and acceptance, they would face the future together. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the scene. The 6 Thompson sisters, tired but happy, curled up in the adults' laps. Rick, holding Abby as she dozed, looked at his expanded family with a smile. The road that brought them here had been unexpected and often difficult, but the result was nothing short of magical. In that moment, surrounded by love and the promise of a bright future, Rick knew without a doubt, no matter what fate had in store, they would face it together as the extraordinary family.